of money. Professor Wolff recently on Economic Update decided to discuss inequality, profit and inequality, the two driving forces of capitalism. Now, I have a couple of graphs I want to show you just how crazy this is, but why we need to be focused on the housing issue, which I did discuss recently, and more importantly, what happened after 1970. So we're going to fill this all out. I want you to see exactly how wealth inequality happened in this country. And we're going to start with this video. We're starting with 1960s, but the graph I'm going to show you starts with 1970s. I think he addresses both, if I remember correctly, in this video. Let's go ahead and get started. Profit and inequality, two driving forces of capitalism.
Recently, 30 well-known economists signed a letter published in many places around the United States demanding federal rent control. The cost of renting an apartment has shot up. It's a major cause of the inflation we have been suffering over the last 2 or 3 years. Rents are out of control. One of the signs of it is growing homelessness because people can't afford the rising rents. And there doesn't seem to be much anyone is doing about it except lamenting the fact. I wanted to get at this notion of rent control because in the letter, the economists tell us how it can be done. Here's their suggestion. There are two government agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that are very active in the government support of the housing of the United States. As I'll explain in a moment, there would not be the mass housing of individuals in this country, in apartments or in their own homes, without government subsidy and government support. It's one of the examples that you have to give to people who say, this is an economy based on individual private enterprise. No, it isn't. No, it never was. It is an economic system dependent on the government and nowhere more so than in housing. Let me explain. In 1938, the depths of the U.S. Depression, the government set up Fannie Mae. And here's what that agency of the government does. It goes to banks around the country and it says, if you lend money to someone to buy a home, to someone to build a multi-home apartment complex, here's what you can do. You lend them the money, they sign an agreement called a mortgage, and here's what we'll let you do, Mr. Banker. We'll let you turn around and sell that mortgage to us, a government agency. We'll allow banks across the country to do that, which they never could do before, and we will take the risk away from them because they can sell us the mortgage literally the next day after they have arranged it with a borrowing family. And we will bundle them together and create a new kind of security that can be invested in by people around the world, giving them a piece of a bundle of mortgages as they are paid back each month. Before Fannie Mae, before this was done, it was typical in this country that if you wanted to buy a home, you had to put down 50% as a down payment, and there were lots of restrictions on how easily the bank could take the home away from you.
Could you imagine having to come up with 50% as a down payment to buy a house today? That's insane. Like most people, a lot of people can't come up with the 20% that's required, right? Like that's why some people do the first time home buyer programs where you only have to come up with like that I think I had to come up with like 3%, 3.5%, something like that. But 50% would be insane if you were trying to buy a house today. That's crazy.
A private housing system, which is what existed, was unaffordable by the mass of Americans. So the government stepped in, made it affordable by this arrangement, which ended up allowing you to get a home with a much lower down payment and with much less burdensome conditions. And what these economists are saying is, let's face it, the government supports housing in this country. It subsidizes it by removing the risks from the bank lenders, etc. Let's get something in return for the average person. Rent control would be something that could be administered both by Fannie Mae and the additional agency, Freddie Mac, that was set up in 1970. It shows it can be done. If the political will is there, we could have the rent control around the country that already exists in cities like New York and many other places where it has been quite successful for decades. The second update today starts with the HSBC Bank.
Let's stop there for a second, and we're going to talk about the rent control issue. They're trying to bring back rent control in Boston. They've voted for it. Like, a lot of people fought for this. A lot of housing activists fought for it. At one point in time, Boston did have rent control, and then they removed it. I don't know why. I didn't live here when that happened, when they removed it and when they had it, but they're trying to bring it back. And one of the things that Marty Walsh said when he was mayor here was that we can't bring back rent control in Boston. We just can't. We just can't do it. Apparently, that's not true, because they seem to be moving towards that. But I think there's a difference between having rent control and rent stabilization. We don't have either in Boston. There is no cap on how much the landlord can increase the rent. So some people are lucky and they have a landlord that may not increase the rent every year. And some people are not so lucky and their landlord will increase the rent sometimes by a couple $100s, right? That's where rent control coming in or some type of rent stabilization could help that. But again, we live in a capitalist system. We live in a system where people want to make profit. And in order for people to make more profit, what are they going to do? They're going to continue to increase the rent, especially for landlords that don't have more than one property. This is happening across the country. Even some of the places that used to be cheaper to live in are no longer cheaper to live in anymore. I told you guys with the cost of living report that Florida is also now really expensive. Apparently, like it's crazy how much you're supposed to make now to live in Florida, a state that people used to flee to because it was cheaper to live in. Now that's the housing issue that we have in this country. Now we're going to fast forward with, because I think I'm done with this part here. Yeah, that's the part about, that's when he gets into foreign policy. Now we're going to dive into the cost of living, this part of the video where he talks about what wages actually are. We're going to get into what your true wage really is. Now, this would account for inflation, etc. And Richard Wolff is going to take it back. I think he starts with the 1960s. And then goes into the 1970s. And we're going to see a big difference here. Watch this.
The top bracket of the personal income tax, that is the highest bracket that the richest people have to pay. In the 1960s, it was 70%. So the richest Americans had to pay at the top, on the biggest chunk of their wealth, 70% of their income.
Pause. In the 1960s, the top 1% had to pay 70%. Let's make sure we get that right. Let's go back. Right about here.
Personal income tax. That is the highest bracket that the richest people have to pay. In the 1960s, it was 70%. So the richest Americans had to pay at the top, on the biggest chunk of their wealth, 70% of their income each year.
Each year for taxes in the 1960s. Now, hold on to that, because I'm going to show you how this is connected. We talk about the housing issue as well, and this idea of rent control. So in the 1960s, the people who are the top 1%, 70% of their income, they had to pay in reference to taxes each year. But that all changed.
Out of every dollar above in that bracket, they had to give Uncle Sam 70 cents. What is the highest bracket rich people have to give to the federal government today? 39%. Please understand, from the 60s to now, the richest people's income tax dropped from 70 to 39%.
Today, those people in that same income bracket only have to pay 39% of their income in reference to taxes. So that's a big difference. It's not like it went from 70% to 60%. We're talking 70% to 39%. There have been a multitude of tax breaks that have been given to people, particularly in that income bracket. And there's also tax loopholes too, like people have offshore accounts, etc. But that should have never happened. And I'm going to show you why in just a second. So hold on to that piece.
All right. What share of the government's revenue, federal government, Washington, came from taxes on corporate profits? In the 1960s, that rate was twice what it is today. Today, the federal government's revenue from taxing corporations is 6% of the total revenue the government gets. The rest of it is basically paid by individuals. Wow.
6%. And this is because there have been so many breaks that have been given to corporations. This happened before Trump, before Obama. Remember, he went all the way back to the 1960s. So these corporations are not paying their fair of taxes, their fair share of taxes. Now, you make the connection between the corporations not paying their fair share of taxes, the corporations owning both of these political parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, having politicians in DC to basically do their bidding when it comes to legislation. This is why I say they usually only pass things that have some type of corporate interest. And who's really running the country? Who's really running the country? It's the corporations. If the corporations are only paying 6% of their tax share to the federal government, and the corporation own the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and they have politicians in DC voting on legislation to benefit their interest, the corporations own the country. So when we go to the housing issue that he was just talking about, people fighting for rent control, some type of rent stability in some way, shape, or form in this country, or people not being able to afford to pay rent because it's too high now. Who owns real estate? It's not people like me and you. So it's all controlled. It's all controlled. And more specifically with the housing situation, what we talked about before on the show, you have to remember in the 2008 housing crisis, after that, BlackRock bought up those homes that were foreclosed. They renovated those homes, increased the price, and sold them to people who had the money to pay cash outright. And that continues till this day. So there shouldn't be this. We should have some type of law in place that prevents companies like BlackRock or Vanguard Group from coming in and buying single family homes or other types of real estate. Because what happens is it makes it harder for the average American to be able to afford the rent, number one, or a single family home. There's no law in this country against that. That's why they continue to do it. Let's continue a little bit more here, and then I'm going to show you that graph.
What a shift from taxing corporations to individuals, and from taxing the richest individuals to, you guessed it, you and me. And that's why we have enormous inequality. But one more reason.
Let's pause here. They basically took the burden from the 1960s. They took the burden from the corporations who had the money to pay those things, and they put the burden on you and me.
What happened to wages between the 1960s and today? The answer is they went nowhere. It's really important to understand that if you adjust the wages Americans got for the prices they have to pay to get what economists call the real wage, what you can afford to buy with the wages you get, the real wage in this country has stagnated for 50 years.
Yep.
It has gone nowhere. When you adjust for prices, the average wage in the United States today is very little different from what it was, say, in 1978.
Hold that year, 1978. Let's remember that. So it is now 2023, and Richard Wolff is telling you that the wages that you're making today is very little different from what the wages were in 1978. Now, when we say this again, we're talking about the actual wage. By actual wage, I mean that's adjusting for the prices, that's adjusting for inflation. So some of these graphs that you probably have seen before, I know some of the ones I've seen before, that's not the real wage because they're not adjusting for the prices and inflation. That is absolutely insane that we live in a country today, and I want more people to hear about this so you know who your real enemy is. Decades ago, we're talking multiple decades ago, and people are still making the same wage that they were in 1978.
That means that the economic growth of the United States, the productivity that went up with the arrival of atomic energy, with the arrival of the computer, the robot, artificial intelligence, all the gains in output made possible over the last 50 years did not go to the working class. They went to the ruling class.
And I'm going to show you that right now. When he talks about the gains, about the technology, when he talks about like the industrial, let me show you. We're going to go to that now. I'm going to show you who made the money. You're going to watch this video. Let me make sure the volume is off because I can't see any of this. I'm just gonna make this smaller so I can see what's what. Okay, there we go, full screen. We're gonna watch this video that was on TikTok. And we're gonna pause here and there because I'm gonna show you, we're gonna start with 1981. Then I'm gonna show you another graph where we go back to the 70s. We're gonna start 1981 at the very beginning of Reaganomics. And I wanna show you, we're gonna show you who made the money. All the productivity that happened in this country, we're going to show you where that money went. Now, the red line here is the top 1%, 0.01%. Green is 1%. Yellow is GDP per capita. The blue line here is the middle 40%. And the purple line at the bottom is everybody that's that bottom 50%. Watch this. Okay. Reaganomics begin. That's where we're starting. Watch the top 0.01% continue to grow. Watch. Woo! You see that big jump right there? 1984. Boom. You see this? Shot through the roof. Again, this is still during Reaganomics. It's supposed to be muted, Eric. It has music. So that is still Reaganomics. Watch this. There was a drop in 1985 with that top 0.01%. Oh, but don't worry. And look who's still at the bottom. You see this? Up, there we go. So there was a significant dip right here. That's 1986. And then that top 0.01% shots right back up. 1988. The people that bottom 50%, they're still here, still at the bottom. 0% is here. They are beneath the 0%. These are the people living below the poverty line. Let's continue. Goes down a little bit, 1990. Goes down, goes back up. Let me pause here. Now we're getting to the tech boom. Watch what happens once again. You'll see who's making the gains. So there's the tech boom. They're still shooting up, still shooting up. 1999, 2000, 2001, going down, going up a little bit more. Housing bubble. Yep. So now we're in the housing bubble right here. And look at what happened, folks. During all these gains, look, that top 1%, they still gained, but nobody profited as much as the top 0.01%. Everybody else is still here. Look at the people at the bottom 50%. They still never made it to 50%. They never made it to the 100. They're still at the bottom. You see this significant gap? And it continues. Housing bubble. Global financial crisis. 2010. 2011, they dipped down. So what I want to show you, even when we had the global financial housing crisis in 2010, notice that top 0.01% still continued to climb just even a little bit. They dropped a little bit, but then they shot right back up. This is what they do. They continue to do that by exploiting all the rest of us. There's a dip again, global financial crisis. Okay, so what that shows you is that those are the people who have made the gains, but more importantly, they've done so by exploiting the rest of us. Now, I'm going to show you wage stagnation in 3 different charts to show you a different view of this. Now, this goes into, we're going to talk about America's pay. Let's just go to the charts. This is the first one. The U.S. middle class had 17,867 less income in 2007 because of the growth of inequality since 1979. So we're going back to this time again. Look at this. Household income on the broad middle class, actual and projected, assuming no growth in inequality, 1979 to 2011. So if you look here, this dotted blue line here, and then you have the pale, this is like a light blue line that says income. We are going to compare the two. Income with no change in inequality. The dotted blue line, if you go to 2006, it should show $94,000, a little bit over that. But when you look at the light blue line, which is the actual income. So again, this is also accounting for inflation and price increase. The actual income in 2006 was $76,443. Here's that $17,867 loss they were referring to. In fact, every year on this graph, if you let's start with 1982, you will see that this is where the split happens. Before 1982, income with no change in inequality and actual income, they were actually dancing together. After 1982, they start to go solo. They're not dancing anymore. You see where the split starts to happen? So here comes the inequality. And then, whoa, man. Whoa, buddy. And then we get over to 2006. Now I want to show you another graph. We're going to talk about wage trends. Check this one out. Disconnect between productivity and typical workers' compensation from 1948 to 2013. Look at this. 1948 to 1973, productivity was up 96.7%. Hourly compensation was up 91.3%. Not too shabby, hey? You look at the graph here again. So productivity is a light blue and hourly compensation is dark blue. Let's look at this half right here, 1948 to 1973. What you will notice is that once again, productivity and hourly compensation, they're dancing together for the most part from 1948 to 1973. That makes sense, right? I mean, technically, look, productivity up 96.7%, hourly compensation up 91.3%. That sounds pretty fair. However, something changes after 1973. If we look at 1973 to 2013, productivity is up by 74.4%, and hourly compensation is up by 9.2%. You see the significant difference between the two? Now look at the line. We started 1973 and all of a sudden productivity and hourly compensation decide they do not want to dance together no more. They said they want to dance solo. So productivity goes to the left and productivity just shoots all the way up, 243.1%. Hourly compensation takes a different path. And hourly compensation, as you notice, it does not increase along with productivity. So hourly compensation, for the most part, is stagnant. It reaches, by 2013, it reaches 108.9%. So you see this significant gap here. Now, let me ask you a question. How is productivity increasing if hourly compensation is not increasing? That means that people are doing more work for less pay. And this is apparently along the line when people realize we can have more productivity and just pay people less, and they'll do it anyway because they need the job. Also, do not forget, this is also around the time of Reaganomics, right in here, those early 80s, where Ronald Reagan said that he believed in trickle-down economics. So you give that money to the top, the people at the top, and it'll trickle down to people in the bottom. That never happened, right? So we have to consider all of these things together. Basically, after 1973, these corporations and the top 0.01% decided we are going to keep hourly compensation about the same, but we're going to get people to increase productivity. And because they need this money, because they can't have no layoffs and shit, because they got to pay these bills and they got kids, they'll do the work anyway. And this is what has been happening for at least all of my adult life. And it continues. And now when you see people in the labor industry rising up and demanding more benefits or trying to form a union, now they're like, whoa, we cannot have this. Too many of you are doing this at one time. And this is why I keep telling you we need a general strike. General strike will shut all this shit down. One more chart. This is a doozy. When it comes to the pace of annual pay increases, the top 1% wage grew 138% since 1979, while wages from the bottom 90% grew 15%. Here's the chart. 1979, again, dancing together. At some point, there was that connection between the top 1% and the bottom 90%. Somebody came along and said, can't have that, bud. So the top 1% after, again, 1979, notice how they climb, and they have their moments where they drop too, but they just continue to climb and climb up, right? That goes all the way to 2013. But as you notice, the people at the bottom, when we look at their actual wages, these are the real wages that adjust for inflation. The people at the bottom stay at the motherfucking bottom. This is a problem. And this is only going to 2013. There's many more. So when I tell you that your real enemy is the people who are at that top 1%, and especially that 0.01%, trust me, son. Trust me. Look at what they're doing to you. And by the way, most of us are at the bottom. You may think you're not at the bottom, but I used to have that graph that showed people who were the places where they were, where people thought they were and where they actually were. Most of us are at the bottom. That's that. So something to think about. Richard Wolff is really good when it comes to, these particular issues. So usually if I'm going to address something, I'll try to see how he referenced it, like on Economic Update. But I want you to connect this to what I told you about the housing situation in the recent clip that I did. I think JFK's on the cover. Yeah, JFK's on the cover. And it's a person next to him that says, I live in a storage unit. Make the connection between these two. Remember, I told you JFK made that statement, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Remember, he made that in 1961. Now compare that to all the other dates we've been looking at today. Thank you for the super chat, Old Crow Targeteer. Love me some Sabby, but are we going to get to the bottom of your issues with Vivek? Yes, I think this dude is a plant. I think he's absolute fraud. I really do. Thank you, Ellen. Big thanks for your show, Sabby. I'm more leery of West than many, but will likely vote for him just to shake up the duopoly. We're about to talk about shaking up duopoly in a second. And thank you, Phantomus. FYI, if you're a fan of Bone Thugs and Harmony, Crazy Bone is fighting for his life in a hospital in surgery for an arterial leak in his lung right now. Oh my God, I did not know. I didn't know that. Damn. And thank you, Stu. In the 1950s, the top bracket was over 90%. Thank you, Stu.